punch. He's going to keep his fist just an inch away. Watch closely. Ha! Whoa! Oh, my goodness.
I felt that all the way through me.
I didn't think you even moved. Ladies and gentlemen, the one-inch punch. Bruce Lee.
You know Bruce Lee for the one-inch punch, the speed, the power, the myth. But let me stop you right there. Because what if I told you the punch was never the point? Anyone can train muscles. Anyone can copy technique. Anyone can learn movement. But Bruce Lee built something most people never touch. A mind that refused limits. While the world watched his body, Bruce Lee was obsessively training his thinking. Every single day, he asked himself one question. How do I remove what holds me back? Not how do I look stronger, not how do I impress others, but how do I eliminate weakness from the inside? That's why he challenged tradition, rejected rigid systems, refused to be boxed into one style, and people hated that. Martial artists said he broke rules. Hollywood said he didn't fit the image. Society tried to define his ceiling, but Bruce Lee understood something early. The world rewards clarity of self, not permission. That's why he said, be like water. Not as poetry, but as strategy. Water adapts without losing force. It flows, it fills, it overcomes. That was his mental architecture. As an Asian man in America, he faced rejection constantly. But instead of internalizing rejection, he internalized responsibility. He didn't say, they won't let me. He said, I will create my own path. That is pure USA mindset. Individual responsibility, self-creation, no excuses. And that mindset was only getting sharper. Then, his body betrayed him. A spinal injury so severe, doctors warned him he might never train the same again. For most people, that would be the end. For Bruce Lee, it was a turning point. While his body was forced to stop, his mind accelerated. He wrote goals. He visualized recovery. He rehearsed success when pain was the only reality. He understood something most people don't. Belief is a muscle. If you don't train it, it weakens. Bruce Lee didn't eliminate fear. He observed it. He didn't fight doubt. He studied it. Because awareness gives control. Most people let emotions control decisions. Bruce Lee let awareness control emotion. That's why pressure refined him instead of breaking him. Discipline mattered more than motivation. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is mental. And mental strength is built quietly, when nobody is watching. He trained when tired, studied when bored, stayed aligned when quitting felt logical. Bruce Lee wasn't obsessed with beating others. He was obsessed with being better than yesterday. That's why his movements looked alive, not copied, not robotic, but expressive, because they came from understanding, not imitation. People still argue about how fast Bruce Lee was, but they ignore the real question. What kind of mind does it take to live like that? Bruce Lee believed you don't discover who you are, you decide. And once decided, you protect that identity with discipline. He destroyed his own habits, changed his thinking, evolved constantly, because comfort was the enemy. He didn't wait for permission. He built leverage. That's why his legacy still breathes today. Not because of punches, but because of principles. He taught that rigidity breaks, but adaptability survives. That limits are learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. So when you watch Bruce Lee, don't just watch how he moves, watch how calm he is, how controlled, how free from ego. True power doesn't shout, it doesn't prove, it doesn't chase validation. True power is quiet, focused, unshakable. Bruce Lee didn't master martial arts, he mastered himself. The one-inch punch wasn't his greatest weapon. The greatest weapon was a mind that refused to be trapped. And that's why he was, and still is, built different. Here's the part of Bruce Lee's story most people never notice. He wasn't obsessed with being powerful. He was obsessed with being awake, awake to his thoughts, awake to his reactions, awake to the invisible patterns running his life. Bruce Lee believed most humans live on autopilot. They react instead of choosing. They repeat instead of creating. And repetition without awareness creates invisible prisons. That's why he trained his mind to pause before anger, before fear, before ego. He understood that the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, but the most self-aware. That's why, even under pressure, he looked calm, not because he felt nothing, but because he felt everything and still stayed in control. Bruce Lee once wrote that emotional reactions are wasted energy, energy that could be redirected into precision, into growth, into purpose. That's elite-level thinking. Most people waste mental energy proving themselves. Bruce Lee invested it in refining himself. He didn't argue with critics. He didn't chase validation. He didn't explain his vision to people who couldn't see beyond tradition, because he knew something painful but true. Not everyone is meant to understand you, especially when you're evolving faster than they are. So instead of fighting resistance, he outgrew it. That's why his confidence didn't look loud. It looked grounded, because it wasn't built on applause. It was built on self-trust, and self-trust comes from one place only: keeping promises to yourself, training when it's hard, thinking when it's uncomfortable, choosing growth when comfort feels safer. Bruce Lee wasn't fearless. He was fear-aware, and that awareness made him dangerous. Here's the final truth. Bruce Lee's life was never about fighting others. It was about fighting stagnation, the slow death of potential, the comfort of excuses, the illusion of, this is just who I am. He believed the moment you stop evolving, you start decaying, mentally first. That's why he constantly rebuilt himself. New ideas, new methods, new perspectives. Because identity, for him, was not fixed. It was fluid. And fluid identities survive in changing worlds. That lesson matters more today than ever. In a world moving fast, rigid minds break. Bruce Lee prepared for a future where adaptability would be the real power. That's why his philosophy feels modern even now. Because it wasn't tied to time, it was tied to human nature. He believed the mind should be trained like a weapon, sharp, flexible, and controlled. Not overwhelmed by emotion, not hijacked by fear, not frozen by doubt. And that's the real invitation in his legacy. You don't need to punch like Bruce Lee. You don't need to move like him. You don't need to look like him. You need to think like him. Question limits. Reject inherited beliefs. Stay fluid under pressure. Choose discipline over motivation. Growth over comfort. Because once the mind is free, life has no choice but to expand. Bruce Lee didn't become a legend by chasing greatness. He became one by removing everything that wasn't true. And that's the work. Not adding more, but subtracting what holds you back. That's why his story doesn't end. It transfers from his mind to yours. And if you apply even one of these principles, you won't just move differently. You'll live differently, calmer, sharper, unshakable, not loud, not flashy, just built different.
Subscribe to Big Difference.